Good morning, everybody. I'm Charlotte Buchanan Yale. I'm director of the Museum of Native American History, and it is always my honor to host one of these amazing presentations. We always want to acknowledge that we're broadcasting from the ancestral lands of the Caddo, the Quapaw, and the Osage people. And as we braid time at the Museum of Native American History, I always hope what we do through our collection and our presentations, that it honors those that have gone before us, who walk among us, and also will be shining the light and with us in the future. I always want to say that the best thing about my job is that you never know who's going to be on the phone or walking through the great doors of the Museum of Native American History. And I'm always amazed of the billions of people on this earth that you all have come into our orbit, as well as some of our amazing family of presenters. Before I introduce our guest today, I have to do some shameless advertising for the museum that we've been nominated as one of the top 10 history museums in the United States by USA Today. And you can go to our website and vote every day or on your phone by going to Top 10 USA Today. And we absolutely appreciate it. We have like 10 more days left, to pull off this amazing feat. With that, March is Women's History Month. And to start it off, I am absolutely so glad that through the email machine and picking up the phone, I have had the honor and delight to meet Ms. Dolores Purdy and add her to our family of presenters. I always want to remind all of you, boys and girls of all ages, that history begins at home. Never miss a beat to really ask about your grandparents and your family, about who you are, and to parlay that on to the next generations. And Dolores, I know that she discovered her art form while researching her family's genealogy of Caddo and Winnebago, and it led to this discovery of ledger art, which we absolutely love. And in the past, ledger art was a warrior art done mostly by men. But what I love about Dolores, she's given that feminine spin to it. And with her perspective, she adds humor and seriousness to her artwork. I want you all to know that there will be a Q&A at the end of this. We have the handsome Siavash will be the moderator today, taking your questions. And with that, it is absolutely my honor to introduce Ms. Dolores Purdy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you to the Museum of Native American History. This is, I'm very pleased, I'm very honored to be included in your repertoire of people that you like to talk to. So this is pretty cool. I'm excited, yes. So as you know, my name is Dolores Purdy. I am a member of the Caddo Nation of Oklahoma. That's where they're at now. Originally, they were right there in the Red River area in Arkansas, where you guys are at, in Bentonville, and on down into Louisiana. I'm also part Winnebago, and that's both on my father's side. On my mother's side, I'm Swedish and German, so I've got a mix, a big mix. So like I said, the Caddos are now located in Oklahoma, and originally were there in Arkansas all the way down into Louisiana. And the Winnebagos are originally from Minnesota, but now are in Nebraska. So basically, I'm both Northern and Southern Plains. I grew up as an Air Force brat, so we moved all over the place. And when I was in middle school is when my dad retired, and we ended up in Topeka, Kansas. I was like in middle school at the time. And that, I guess, is what you call home. My home is Topeka, Kansas. I've been a trained watercolorist. I've been in shows for over 25 years, in galleries. And about 13 years ago, I decided to move to Santa Fe. And I live just north of Santa Fe, a little village called La Mesilla. It's very nice here. We have terrible internet connection. And so far, I think everything's working well. So anyway, So the way I discovered ledger art was really weird. Like I told you, I was a watercolorist. And one day I got onto this. It was really before Ancestry.com started. And I started digging around trying to find, let's find some of the relatives that are Caddos and stuff. And I don't know if any of you've ever been onto any of these sites and you end up spiraling down. And so next thing you know, you are looking at people that, well, first aren't even related to you, and you're trying to figure out how they're related to you. So I found this Caddo guy, not related to him, but I found him by the name of Huwani. Now, it said he was in prison in Fort Marion, Florida for 3 years. Why would some guy from Oklahoma be sent to Fort Marion, Florida? And he was sent there with 71 other prisoners. I mean, like, was he like the big horse thief, you know? So anyway, I started looking into why he would have been in prison so far away. And then I discovered that some of the people he was in prison with were artists. Okay, well, that's cool. So, well, this is what happened. So after all that searching for Huwani and looking at the art and finding research material, well, this happened. I fell in love with the antique ledger stories, and I couldn't get enough of them. Before I knew it, I put away the brushes and picked up colored pencils, and this happened. So what was really interesting is when I first started looking for ledger art, you know, close to 2 decades ago, there was very little information on it. And I found this book. It's published in 1971. And this was about what I could find in this book. It was in this book. And I was so happy to find this. It's a well-written book. If you have a chance to get a hold of this, Plains Indian Ledger Art from Fort Marion, it's a great reference material. As you could tell by the jacket, I've referenced it many times. So, but now there's a lot more books on it, and there's some great websites, and one in particular I want to share with you later on. So we need to start at the very beginning to understand ledger art and its origins. Long before the Europeans arrived, men would decorate their tipis and their hide robes with the images of their great bravery and warfare, their hunting, their heroic exploits. And they would use clay and charcoal to do all of this drawing on there. Now, these were men's drawings because women were not allowed to draw representational figures. So as you look at this teepee, this is like the coolest teepee. You can see this guy had a lot of action. I mean, you see so many horses running around. You can tell there's some battles and battle scenes going on this teepee. Now, like I said, women were not allowed to draw representation figures, but they were allowed to draw and work with abstract and geometric designs, not representational. So here, you can see there we've got a war shirt and a pair of moccasins, and they would decorate the dress and the apparel with porcupine quills or with drawing, but porcupine quills is what they used pre-European contact. So they would do this quilling and drawing on geometric designs on apparel and regalia, and for use, for everyday use or for war use. Generally, men did not draw represent. In fact, they didn't draw geometric designs. The only exception would be if a warrior has had a dream and he needs to put this abstract design onto his shield, then he would actually paint that onto his shield. So here we go. This is the ledger art I found. It was so exciting. So there's so much to tell you, and I find this so fascinating in so many ways. I'm just going to be scratching the surface, but I really want to spark your interest because I think you all would have a wonderful time if you would start looking this up and seeing what all this was about. There's so many stories that go in with it because ledger art is a pictorial language. There was no written language. So this was the way that they would express their stories. So in the 1800s, early 1800s, with European contact, That's when trading began for many things. There were the beads, skins, and hides, small trinkets, and of course, colored pencil and paper. Well, these colored pencil and paper and ledgers became very coveted by the men because they could then had a portable book that they could go and show to people. They could draw on it and they could show these people. And so it was very convenient for them to have this. You know, I mean, you only have so much room on the teepee. This way they had a lot of room. So at first glance, when you really look at this, it's kind of folksy, folk arty, very simplistic. But if you really look at it, it's really quite sophisticated. For example, the fellow who drew this was a limited palette. There's only 4 colors that was used on this piece particularly. And from an arts perspective, the way he handled this as a whole village scene is really very cool. Like I say, you got to remember this is a pictorial tool. This is their communication, and it's used to document the tribal and society and personal history of this group. So here, as you can see, this is a scene of everyday life in the camp. You've got dancing, to somebody stretching hides, playing a flute, and cooking, just to name a few. The more you look at it, the more you see what's going on. So to begin, to better understand ledger art from the Southern Plains perspective, I'm going to have to give you a brief synopsis on the Oklahoma history. In the mid-1800s, there was a campaign to take care of the native problem, and it really began in earnest. At this time, there was the government made Oklahoma Indian Territory and moved 39 tribes into this area, and they were put on their own reservation. Well, to get the tribes to agree to do this, they signed treaties, and in the treaties, it says that if they stayed on their allotted land, that they would have protection against the army. They would have protection against the pioneers and the settlers that were there. They would also be supplied with food and with staples, and everything would be really good for them, and they wouldn't have any problems with anybody. Well, it sounds good, but unfortunately, sometimes the food was spoiled when it came. Sometimes it never arrived. And then the game that was actually on that property where they could stay at would be depleted really fast. So in the spring of 1874, when the supplies didn't arrive and they were hungry, and they got on their horses and they left the reservation to go hunt on lands that's now occupied by whites. And at that time, the violence really spread. So the government, who was determined to stop this, they stepped in. They arrested these lawbreakers and these leaders and people they would consider a possible threat, and maybe start an uprising, and they sentenced them to 3 years in exile from their families. Now, these men and women, like I say, were considered the instigators, and it was feared that they would continue to keep starting trouble and maybe have an uprising. These prisoners came from the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Kiowa, Comanche, and Caddo tribes. Those tribes are all located in western and southwestern Oklahoma. There was a total of 71 men and 1 woman who was arrested in Oklahoma in 1875. They were shipped by train in shackles all the way to Florida, and they spent 3 years at Fort Marion. The one female was a warrior woman, and she rode with her husband for 12 years prior to the arrest. So she was considered to be a leader. I believe she was Cheyenne. So once they were there, Captain Pratt, who was their warden, so he cut their hair, he gave them uniforms to wear, he instructed they be taught to count, to speak, to read English, to think and look like white men. He's known to have said, kill the Indian in him and save the Indian. Kill the Indian in him and save the man. So there were about 28 men who were the primary ledger artists, and they went on to the Hampton Institute, and then it went on to Carlisle Indian School. And And these were the primary ledger artists. Now, the reason they were is they were the young men, and they were gaining their pride in their accomplishments. These are the ones who's really bragging up their heroic deeds. About the age of 45, the older men wouldn't be doing the drawing so much. In fact, they were older men. They were the older ones who would kind of help guide the young warriors. So these men spent their free times and they were filling up old books, ledgers and stuff supplied to them by Captain Pratt. They draw scenes depicting pre-reservation life on the paper. And paper is hard to come by. And so any kind they used, or old ledgers, whatever. Well, these big bad guys became sort of a tourist attraction. I mean, all these people on the East Coast had heard about the big Indian Wars that was taking place out in the West and the Midwest, and they'd get on a train and they would come down there to Florida and they'd check them out. They'd sit there and they'd watch them. So they became quite really a vacation destination. Well, of course, when you go on vacation, you got to have a souvenir. So Captain Pratt would have them draw ledgers for people if they asked. They would draw a ledger for them, and then the people would pay them. And it was really kind of cool because then Pratt would send the money back to Oklahoma for the families of these warriors. So Arthur Silverman wrote in his book, 100 Years of Native American Painting, this was in 1978, of all the ledger drawings, perhaps the most significant because of their direct impact on the later development of Native American painting were those created in that most unlikely place for an art movement, the prison of Fort Marion, Florida. So this is a cool one. This guy is White Horse. He's a Kiowa. The way we know he's White Horse is you see the little squiggly line just above his head, and it looks like a horse, a white horse. So that's why we know who he is. White Horse was a famous raider. And here he is. He's getting ready to go to war. And his spotted war pony is being led along because they conserved the ponies for the battle. His wife has following right behind him. She's carrying his traditional armaments and things that he will be needing for war. And meanwhile, he keeps his gun close by. But as you can see, the technique of ledger art is very simple. It's flat work without any shading, very little background, or most of the time there is no background. Distance objects do not appear smaller in appearance, and figures are generally outlined in black. And the ledgers generally read from right to left. By right to left, I mean that the action occurs on the right and moves to the left. Almost, but not always, the horses will be running to the left, dealing with the scene. This is my very favorite historic ledger piece. I just love this thing. I mean, this is a slide with Kiowa chiefs, and they're going to go see the Indian agents. So they are all dressed in their regalia. And they've even got their face painted, and they are getting ready to go see him. The way the artist has used 4 colors and managed to depict this entire scene is to me absolutely amazing. Just with those 4 colors. And remember, there was no erasers, so they couldn't erase. So the artist had to have the entire scene already composed in his head and ready to be put down on paper. I think it's extremely sophisticated. It truly is a very sophisticated piece. Even though there's no shading, there's no background, it's pretty sophisticated. He's actually done some interesting things here. Like, for example, the very first fellow is by the name of Featherhead. Now, he's a known chief. And the way we know it's Featherhead is he's wearing his peace medal. And the markings that's on his quirt that he's holding in his hand, that is the markings just specifically for him. And that way we would recognize who he is. Okay, so this one is counting coup on an unarmed Pawnee. So one of the great acts of warfare, this depicts one of the great acts of warfare. So the Arapaho warrior Heap of Birds, and he's striking a Pawnee with a lance. And the Pawnee is wearing this cape made from the Hudson Bay Blanket Company. And these blankets were traded in the northern plains by the Hudson Bay. So to kill an enemy was good because it reduced the number of the hostile party, but to count coup was proof of complete bravery. To actually touch an enemy with something held in your hand or with part of your body entitled this man to the highest level of bravery, because to touch a living, unhurt man and leave him alive and walk away was the bravest act that could be performed. That's what counting coup means. Now, for the guy who was left alive, it wasn't quite that cool because it was actually kind of a great insult. It was saying he was so unworthy and lowly, he wasn't even worth the effort to kill him. So it's kind of interesting on counting coups. So that's what that means if anybody ever asks. As you can see, the horse's tail has been wrapped up. This is not only for decorative reasons, but this keeps the tail from being caught up in the brush. Sometimes one or more feathers of a raptor will actually be tied to this tail. So that is to help the horse in swiftness in flight and swiftness in battle. See that bird on the top of the head of the native the horseback rider, the warrior on the horse. So generally, this would be another raptor of some kind. It's frequently a kingfisher or hawk or birds of prey. And this was thought to give the warrior swift killing abilities. And the warrior is always important to go to battle dressed in your most impressive dress, because just in case they were killed and they were called face to face to meet the creator. Now, this one is attributed to Black Wolf. He's an Arapaho. Here he's got his face is painted and his mount is decorated. I wanted to talk about the mount on this one. He's got a stretched scalp that's hanging from his bit. That bit is either Spanish or a Navajo bridle. And this horse is ready for warfare. The tradition of a horse with a scalp hanging from his war bridle means he was a very brave horse, and they were referred to in some tribes as thunder horses. Now, these thunder horses were telling the enemy that they can and will devour or eat them. And this stuffed bird, perhaps a mourning dove, is tied on the strip of his chest with otter fur. Now, this one is kind of cool because this is Two Arrows. He's an Arapaho. So in this drawing, there's a warrior named Two Arrows who's touching this Pawnee before he can shoot his arrow. It's a typical depiction of a Pawnee enemy. He's got the winged moccasins, the short breechcloth, and his head's shaved except for a short roach and scalp lock on the top. His quiver and his case are carried on his side. So it shows here with the little glyph, and you see the two arrows that's on there, that this guy is two arrows. The thing that's interesting is he is carrying a shield with Sitting Bull's shield design. Generally, they don't share their shield designs, but Sitting Bull was known to loan his shield because his shield had strong protective medicine. So I have just shown you 5 really cool pieces of old ledger art that is totally amazing to me. There are so many more, and there's so many to find. So I want to tell you about the site. Dr. Ross Frank, professor of ethnic studies at UC San Diego, has began the Plains Indian Ledger Art Project. There's a website that's plainsledgerart.com. Here he has gone in and digitalized a lot of the old ledgers that may be in museums or in personal collections. And he's doing this just for preservation, research, and for public review. And I have been very blessed. That Ross Frank, taught me a lot of things, and he was so ready to answer questions. Janet Burlow, who's a retired professor at the University of Rochester, New York, She was so good to me. Henry Monahan, the gallery director at Morningstar Gallery. He has been a great help. He has taught me a lot. And also Michael Jordan at Texas Tech in Lubbock. So on this website, there's over 40 different ledgers now, and he continues to add more and more. And many have directors. They're called directors. They're researchers. And you can scroll through and find ledgers that have been scanned, and some of them have been researched, or a director has gone through and made notes about them. So I want to point out the second ledger down on this is called Arrows Elk Society Ledger. The director is Michael Cowdery. Now his research is amazing. He's got comments on each page, and there's lots and lots of information on what was going on in that ledger. The ledger had been owned by Morningstar Gallery, and Henry Monahan with Morningstar Gallery was one who helped find Michael Cowdery to work on this ledger, this specific ledger. Sorry. So this is Nelly Two Bears. This took place about 1907. And here you see a beaded valise. Now, prior to the pre-reservation Buffalo culture period, as I told you, using representational figures versus, geometric designs, there was definitely gender-based. The women painted, quilled, and beaded the geometric designs. And they put these on parfleches, clothing, pipe bags, things that would be used by the people in the tribe. While men would paint the combat scenes onto the buffalo robes, tipis, paper obtained through the white trade. Now, what's very interesting is, how could she get by with this? This was 1907. How would she possibly be able to bead these representational figures onto this? This was like, no. So it seems likely, can't find anything about it, but it seems likely that what happened is, first of all, the representational figures may have been sketched onto the surface by men for the women to bead or quill. And another thing she did is she beaded items that were not used by Native people, like doctor's bags, gauntlets, valises. And she generally would use them as a gift or a trade. So let's fast forward to 50 years or so into the late 1920s. Here, the Kiowa 6 brought flat work back into popularity again. Again, the subjects are in the distance and not shown to be smaller to indicate distance, but they are all the same size. There were 5 young men and 1 woman. So as children, these kids were being educated at the Indian Agency in Anadarko, and a teacher by the name of Susie Peters organized some of the more talented ones into an art club. These kids were from very humble backgrounds, and they were the descendants of ledger artists, bundle keepers, or medicine men. In the schools that were operated by the Catholic Church, the children were drawing pictures of rituals that they had seen. So Susie Peters began to distribute this work to get them better known, and some fell into the hands of a fellow by the name of Oscar Jacobson. He's a Swedish immigrant who was then the head of the art department at the University of Oklahoma in 1915. And he brought them to Norman. He set them up with housing and a monthly stipend. And their work inspired a style of painting known as Oklahoma-style flat work. Well, the one single female, her name was Lois Smoky. She was Kiowa, but she didn't last very long. Jacobson had selected her because of her way of depicting the beauty of Kiowa women and the tribal life. She lasted 1 semester. So the men were so jealous of her that they'd end up sabotaging her work, and they tear it up. And Dr. Richard Pierce from Wheaton College in Boston dug around and found this quote by Oscar Jacobson that read, for participating in such an unladylike activity. The resentment found expression in several small, unkind annoyances to her, even to the extent of mutilating her work. So, as I say, Lois, last semester, she said, okay, that's it. I'm done. She left. Another fellow joined the group and they became the Kiowa Six again. She went home. She got married and her life just then revolved around the home and her husband and children. She still loved to draw and to bead. But this lady was really, she was quite gutsy. I mean, to be able to go and do this. And she knew the men resented her, and she was a trailblazer. She managed to change a lot of Native work and how Native work is looked at. Because of her, generations of not only women, but men have been able to have these gender-specific art forms cross boundaries. Men can now do beading and they can do pottery. That was once only a woman's art. Men didn't do that. And women can now draw and bead representational figures without any fear of retaliation. So Lois Smoky, I don't know if she meant to be, but man, she was quite the feminist. So as you can see here, Lois was well known for scenes of home and family and day-to-day life among the Kiowa. Here is another slide of a woman with a cradle board on her back, and she's carrying the baby as she was dancing. Excuse me. Lois was a very talented lady. She obviously liked yellow too. She drew images of female society, and unfortunately, there's not a lot of her pieces that are out there due to her short time and the destruction of so much of her work. So it's quite ironic that of all the Kiowa Six, her work is most coveted and the most collected. I love it. It's great. So here's an example of some of the males' work of the Kiowa Six. As you can see, it's very similar. Now, they were, like I say, some of them were relatives of old ledger artists. Their ancestors were. It's all done flat work without any shading. The figures do not appear further away. And it's kind of similar to historic ledger art. We've got some really cool pieces that they've done. As you can see, they used a limited palette of colors here on this too. Just as their ancestors did. Well, so what happens? Let's fast forward now 80 years, and the reemergence of the ledger art style is now a movement. To those of us involved with it, we can bring our own ideas, our own qualities to this genre of work. Thanks to women like Smoky and the women who've encouraged men to do women's art, anyone can express themselves through this historic art medium. I made this piece as a homage to Lois Smoky, and I so wish I could have met her. She would have been a very cool lady to meet. There's still some resentment among a few males, but not really. Most of them aren't, but you know, you get it occasionally. But the males now understand how cool it is that their brothers can do beading and pottery. So, and a lot of them actually appreciate the fact of what women and the perspective they're bringing into ledger art. When I discovered this ledger art from Fort Marion, I couldn't stop researching it. I was so impressed with the sophistication of this work and the storytelling that goes along with it that, you know, I started shopping for paper and got my colored pencils and started making it myself. This is called Autumn Hunting. And here, my work is, of course, different. I use subtle shading, unlike the ancestors. I, of course, have a much better array of colored pencils, so that really helps. And much nicer pencils. I use Prismacolor pencils. I like to add little things to mine in the storytelling because it's kind of cool. I want to add a story to mine too and look at it as a pictorial language. So I will sometimes have a horse or a rider looking out at the audience. It's just another layer of storytelling in here. I purposely leave the faces off of the human figures, just because I want people to read into it what they want to read into it. If they want to, hey, you want to ride along or whatever they want to look into it, I like for the viewer to actually come up with what they would like to see in this. I also had backgrounds, and generally you don't see backgrounds in, you don't see them in historical art, ledger art. And it's not generally seen too much in contemporary ledger pieces either. So it's kind of like one of my little niches. This is Cadillac Babes. So these are ladies on their way to a dance, and they are going so fast that the patterns on their dushtos, a dushto is the head drop with the big ribbons coming out. So the patterns on this dushto are actually coming off, and they're morphing into insects. I use Prismacolor pencils and layering. And what I mean by layering, so that's one of the great things about being a watercolorist first, is I learned how to layer. I could layer one color on top of another, and it could give it depth and luminosity. It was pretty nice. If you look at the red Cadillac right there in the very front, by the way, also, I like to use a play on cados, so they're Cadillacs. You can see the yellow that I have layered first on the top, like the hood of the car, and then I will go over it again, and it almost makes it look like the sun really is reflecting off the car. Of course, you can't really see it as well in a slide as you do in person. So that's the thing, prints aren't nearly as good as the originals. So this is called Sweeter as the Years Go By. This is a wedding piece. Now, the sharing of a blanket is a sign that the couple are married, or they're a couple, or they're together. So if you've ever heard the saying, split the blanket, it refers to a breakup or a divorce in the native culture. So this is a water bird, or thunderbird. In the Plains culture, it's a symbol of power, protection, and strength. It's considered one of the most powerful of spirits. You will see this if you see a ghost dance regalia. You will frequently see a thunderbird painted on the attire. Okay, so this was fun. This was a really fun thing. This is Indian chiefs. So, what would be motorcycle culture if there wasn't the Indian motorcycle, So I've got these guys on 3 old vintage motorcycles, and they're hauling along. And on the left side is a record of paroled persons, as if they are really speeding. So, and then I added the Indian chiefs just for fun. Excuse me. Paper prior to the 1890s was generally cotton or linen. They were acid neutral. Later on, and on through World War I, the cotton and linen wasn't used nearly as much. That material was basically saved for uniforms. So wood was actually the main ingredient for the paper. The problem with the acidic part of the wood that's in the paper, the wood pulp, is if you've ever gone to and found some old paper, it just crumbles in your hands, your fingers just crumbles up. That's because it's all wood pulp, and the acid has eaten up the paper. Okay, so here's another perspective. I got war heroes. Oh, and another thing about this papers, if you notice the writing on here, I also find it really important when I'm looking for paper is to, if I see really cool writing, and I mean, some of this writing they had back in the 1800s was so elegant. So on this one, I wanted to add the words for war heroes. We have war hero written in English, and right below it is the words written in the Caddo language. We have several speakers. The Caddo language is still alive and well. We have speakers. And and is really taking a reemergence. We've got several young ladies that are really bringing it back. So this is called Going to the Dance, and it's a very feminine piece. It's a mom and her two daughters, and they're on their way to the dance, and they are dressed in their finest. The mother always brings along the girls. And when you go to dances, you know, at the Caddo Nation, young girls are always brought. They need to learn the songs and the dances. So this is an umbrella and purse. I thought I'd try something a little different. I found this old antique umbrella, and the fabric was all rotted out. So I remade the top with leather. I painted it, and the same way for the purse. This took forever. It was a learning piece for me, and I'll never do another one. This one is called Rez Rides. Okay, I couldn't help it. I had to stick another Cadillac in there, and also some pickup trucks. And, you know, just had to put this in here. So this one is titled Home. And these 3 tipis represent the summer home with their flowers. I like the work, the color, the best pop value I can get. Peter Maxx and the psychedelic art of the late 60s has been a great influence on my work. Okay, this is called Generation. Now, this is a large piece, and it's showing a family watching the dance. Now, if you look closely, down in the lower right corner, you see another generational family, and they've chosen kind of just to pass through the scene at this time. If you can't see them, it's a family of skunks. They all kind of look like Pepe Le Pew. So besides Peter Maxx and his influence, also the Art Deco period and Asian textiles. There's also 2 other things I love. I love the elongated, out of proportion figures of the Art Deco period and the rich, bright colors of Asian textiles. So when COVID hit, the galleries closed, museums closed, art shows were over. It was kind of a scary time to be an artist. And trying to sell something that was not considered essential was nearly impossible. Although I did sell a few off the website, but it was kind of interesting. But I started experimenting. And so I really started kind of pumping up this whole Peter Maxx influence. And this one was very fun to do. And I'm probably going to work on these a little bit more. Right now, though, I tell you what, the art markets are taking off. Everything's open. New Mexico just opened up like 2 weeks ago. So now we do not have to worry about masks if we're inoculated. So it all works good. So this is my final slide. This is also my artist statement. Happy art makes a happy home. This is the website, my website for my work. And then this is also the website for the Plains Ledger Art Project. So I'd like you to write that down so you can have that. It's an excellent site. You will learn a lot from that. And I would like to also thank the museum for allowing me to come in to visit, to let you know all about the things that just kind of rock my world. I love all this ledger art, and I'm just going to keep on researching, and I hope you guys do too. So I'm here and I'm open to ask any questions. If anybody has anything to open, in fact, you have to ask questions. So somebody's got to ask me a question.
So we have a few comments.
Okay.
Let's see. We got Karen Knopfsinger Wagaman. She said, "Hi, Dolores. I'm excited to see your work has evolved and received national recognition. I love taking classes with you at Deanne's studio in Topeka."
That's right. Hello, Karen. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
And Cassie Rhodes Carroll also mentioned she loves your ode to Lois Smoky. And I also have a question for you. Your work is fantastic. Do you do lessons and teach other people who are beginners that want to get into maybe getting into art?
Yes. Actually, I have had people who've asked me, if I would help them. And I certainly would. I mean, of course I would. If they wanted to do ledger art, they'd have to do some research because I want them to make sure they understand what's going on. But, learning how to layer colors and things like that is is what makes my work different than other contemporary ledger artists.
So we have a question from Dawn Dale asking, could you please talk about your process of the leather umbrella?
Oh, yes. The one that I'll never do again? Yeah, so so I had found this antique thing, and the silk was just demolished, and I ended up having make patterns of this and of each slice between each of the metal pieces. So that all together. And then I realized that I'm going to have a lining underneath it. So then I end up making a lining. And then at that point, I started coloring it and painting on it with acrylics is how I worked on that.
Okay, cool. John Toledo said, hi, great presentation. Thank you. Where do you purchase your paper from?
Oh, yeah. So 20 years ago, when I first started on this, I could find these old ledgers. It was pretty easy to find. It's a lot more difficult now. If I showed you my closet with my pile of ledgers, but actually, probably the best place, I just bought one with Indian territory on it. And now it was $600. But that I got on eBay. So that's a good place to find some of these, is on eBay.
Cassie Rose Carroll also asked, are there any prints available of your work?
Yes, there are. If you go on my website, I can make a print of any of the pieces that's on there, and I do have some already ready to send out, along with cards too. So I do have the reproductions on there. But I'm serious about checking out Ledger Plains ledgerart.org. It is cool. It is a very cool one.
Dolores, I cannot thank my lucky stars when you emailed us the other day. I want to remind everybody that Dolores is our featured artist, and we also have her prints here, and you can go online or you can come into the museum and her cards. And I think you'll be a continuing member of our trading post and our life from now on. And
I can't wait to come see you.
And you will. Exciting. And you know what's really nice? This right here. Hold on 1 second. Boing. We're starting to open up, and we're good. Starting to do more live events. And I would like to also bring up, our cultural celebration has been moved to September 22nd through the 24th as co-produced by Professor Daniel Wildcat of Haskell Indian Nation University. He's coined the phrase indigenuity. And Dolores, with you taking the tradition of ledger art and have that adaptability to the feminine perspective is indigenuity. So, you're right on our mission, definitely. And then I want to also tell you all before we ring off today, we'll be back here in the museum next Saturday. We have Hear Our Voices every month on the second Saturday of the month that's curated by the amazing Cherokee storyteller, Ms. Gail Ross. We will be bringing in one of our favorites. She is Laguna, Tua, and Hopi descent of the Pueblos. It'll be Eldrina Duma, and she's a delight. So you want to stay tuned and visit us, and you can always watch it on our 9-foot Jumbotron in the Great Room, when you visit the museum. And then on the 16th, we continue Women's Herstory Month. We will co-host over at the Fayetteville Library an author event with one of our favorites, Danae, history professor Farina King will be there with her new book that's out called Returning Home, Danae Creative Works from the Intermountain Indian School. And her books will be available also here at the museum. And then on the 26th, Farina will be doing a presentation of Danae Women in Medicine, Healing Through Generations. And it's really nice because during the last cultural celebration, we had the whole family, her father, Dr. Phil Smith, who's from a long line of Danae healers, but he was interviewed by his grandson. So, the family just keeps expanding across the world. But mostly I want to bring in really quick, April is Earth Day month for us. We have so much going on that month. On the 22nd, there'll be a 2-day event featuring Kitchen Kurundata and author of Earth Medicines, Felicia Cocason Ruiz. You can't even get the book. It's just sold out, but we will have it in here by then. And we're also joining hands with Feeding America. We'll do quarterly events with Indigenous chefs, and the first one will begin for Earth Day. So watch our website, sign up for our newsletter. And one other thing for right after Earth Day, again, we will revisit ledger art with another one of our family members. Kiowa artist Jay Benham will bring his art form and ledger art alive in an installation here at Mona. So that's all you're getting out of me today. It's a gorgeous day on planet Earth. Be nice to each other, and we'll see you at the museum.